So a portal is a never-ending project because you always have more use cases and the business changes and technology changes. And therefore, you need to adjust and you need to provide the right experiences and the right level of abstractions to your end users.
This is DevOps Paradox, episode number 261. Visionary Views on Internal Developer Platforms and Portals with Port. This episode of DevOps Paradox is brought to you by Port. Welcome to DevOps Paradox. This is a podcast about random stuff in which we, Darren and Victor, pretend we know what we're talking about. Most of the time, we mask our ignorance by putting the word DevOps everywhere we can and mix it with random buzzwords like Kubernetes, serverless, CI/CD, team productivity, islands of happiness, and other fancy expressions that make us sound like we know what we're doing. Occasionally, we invite guests who do know something, but we do not do that often since they might make us look incompetent. The truth is out there, and there is no way we are going to find it. P.S. It's Darren reading this text and feeling embarrassed that Victor made me do it. Here are your hosts, Darren Pope and Victor Farsick. Victor, we've been talking internal developer portals and internal developer platforms all the time. And people keep asking, what's the difference? What's going on with those things?
My short explanation is that platform is everything. Everything that you use combined is a platform, right? Those can be anything from tools on your laptop to servers, to services, to APIs, to UIs, all of that. Everything you have and you use in your company, that's a platform, which might be connected or not, which is a separate question, right? But platform is everything. And then a platform has different layers or components. And Portal would be one of those, right? It's visualization component. And visualization can be many things, just to be clear, right? Kind of, I can visualize something on a terminal, but it's a visualization layer of a platform. At least I would qualify it like that. And now, another thing very important, I believe here, before we start the discussion, is that you already have many portals, right? You have many visualizations. If you use Jenkins, you have Jenkins UI. If you use Argo CD, you have Argo CD UI. Almost everything you use, and even if it's not Web UI, it's a CLI, which is also a user interface, right? So you have many of those. The question is, how do we make that unified somehow, right? How do we provide unified APIs behind the services in your platform? How do we provide unified visualization? How do we provide unified observability? Now, I'm extending this much further than probably our topics, but we already have all those things. How do we put them all together, right?
And on today's show, we have Zohar on from Port. Zohar, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Very excited to be here today, and thank you so much for having me.
Now, Port, their H1 is an open internal developer portal. If I say platform today, I might be thinking portal. So everybody, please forgive me right up front. Zohar, what did you think of Victor's definition there, or the differences, the way he defined them, of portals and platforms?
Yeah, so I think Victor is completely right on the definition. I think that a platform is everything end-to-end that you already have built, CI/CD pipelines, Kubernetes, cloud, and we can definitely take a look at it from a layers perspective, right? So you have like the bare metal, the hardcore stuff that DevOps need to maintain and to manage. And then you have the end user, the developers, might be also product managers or AppSec teams that need somehow to consume the different layers of the platform. I think that the definition is absolutely correct. And the portal part is where we try to unify all those siloed experiences into a single one in a compelling way that people don't have to be experts of different pillars of the platform, but they can do things in a native and a natural way.
One way I like to describe all those things is that we have a different set of tools that compromise a platform, right? For whatever, something's for security, something for CI, and so on and so forth. Most of those tools are designed to cater a specific group of people. Like, hey, security tools are designed for security experts. They're not designed for everybody in a company. CI also designed for people who are into CI. Now, whether that's 1% or 99% of the people, doesn't matter. But those are all tools designed to perform specific function and for specific people who are probably committed to that tool, to that function. Where probably portals come in is how can we provide a different layer of abstraction so that everybody can use those tools at the right level? How can I deploy something to Kubernetes without spending 7 years learning Kubernetes? How can I trigger a pipeline and control maybe certain aspects of a pipeline without learning Groovy, right? And so on and so forth. From my perspective, portals are about creating the right level of abstraction for others.
This is correct. I also think that, that what motivated those tools that comprise the platform, right? The Argo CD, the Kubernetes, is to solve a backend problem, like an infrastructure and automation problem. And those UIs that were created on top of them were born due to the fact that people needed to interact with those elements, and were designed specifically for those experts that really understand this domain that they need to operate. But when you think about developers, they are not necessarily are able to learn all those moving parts, and they need something that is more productized. They need something that is native for them to use and does not require them to be experts of all these different tools. In a way, the problem gets even bigger. So assume that I already know how to interact with all the different portals. I also want to see things in context, because the data that I consume from the Argo CD UI and the data that I consume from Kubernetes UI and the data that I consume from the Vault UI has some commonalities and connections between them. So the experience that I need to provide the developers not only simplifies the interaction with those different tools, but provide a unified and a stateful experience on top of all those different tools as one.
So it sounds to me really what a portal is, really what it's trying to give me as an end user of that portal, a consumer of that portal, is a single pane of glass, sort of, into all the tools that I might be interested in. But it seems like to me, A, that is possible, but B, that seems like it would be highly improbable to get the right level of information to me. Am I wrong in thinking that?
No, I think that you've mentioned the right level, and I think the right level is key to successful platform engineering implementation. Because as a developer, I don't need to know everything about what's going on in the depths of the platform. I need to know just enough not to be overwhelmed, but enough to be able to be self-sufficient. So I think the right level of abstraction is key for the successful platform engineering, and it varies across different organizations with different DNAs and different R&D cultures. So being able to provide this right level of abstraction is very important to the developer. And I think that maybe if we take it like one step further, thinking about simplifying the access to the tools, I think that essentially developer portals provide the developers with a unified experience to their day-to-day life, right? So it's not just, an experience for Kubernetes or just setting up scorecards for compliance. If we think about developers' main stations of the day, they have to plan their day. So I need to plan my day with the Jira tickets and the on-call tools and the security alerts that I need to address and the initiatives coming from the management. So I need to have everything related so I can plan my day. And then the next part, developers write code. So portals are not meant to help developers write code. This is why we have IDEs and GitHub Copilot. But they should provide me with all the data and the actions that I need that, again, are part of the platform to be self-sufficient. So if I want, for example, to integrate with an internal API, and I need the documentation of the Swagger it's very hard for me to find it today. So and again, this is part of the platform, and I need to get it in a glance, right? I need to be able to get this documentation right away, or if I need to add a secret to a service, or I need to provision a test environment just to test my code. And then you have the next part, which is shipping features, that again talks a lot about the CI/CD and GitOps processes. So developers need to be able to make the deployment from the UI and put the right quality gates if something is not met. And the quality gates can bring a lot of data from a lot of tools, right? So the portal should unify the information for the developers and give them a single indication if they can go to production or not, and not like 20. And then, managing feature flags, canary should be all part of the unification of a portal. And to complete the self-sufficiency vision, we also need to provide the developers with the day two. Once they ship the feature to production, everything that they need to operate and to maintain the delivered features. So be able to track a health metric. Again, one health metric, not 20. That includes security and quality and APM information and so on. Being able to execute a run book or to remediate an issue automatically, or just to get like temporal permissions to a production resource. The way that a portal is built should kind of like curate itself to the 4 stations of a developer's day-to-day life that really wants to be self-sufficient. They just want to write their code and to make sure that it gets to production as they would expect.
A different way to spin it up, the story, I believe, is also, if you go back at the very beginning, there is certain experts that are doing certain things. Let's say somebody who is dedicated to Kubernetes or maybe database or something like that, right? Let's say, okay, maybe I should convert part of what I do into a service to enable others to do some of the things that I do. Now, most of the time, it will never be all of the things, right? Because things go terribly wrong with Kubernetes. I need to be involved, right? Things go terribly. Database needs to be optimized in some very, very weird way and stuff like that. I need to be involved. But it's about making that distinction, that separation of, okay, those are the things that I can provide as a service, right? Oh, I can enable people to deploy application. I can enable people to see whether application is healthy. And I can enable them to see XYZ that will lead towards actions that they can perform. Like, if you see this thing, maybe it's time to scale your application, right? And then there are some other things that you will, and I'm going to simplify now, you're going to see, contact me, contact Victor, right? Kind of, this is now below the level, something is happening below the level that, so from that perspective, it's very important to somehow filter not only what you can do, but what you will see. Those are the logs that matter to you. Those are not, right? If you see those, you will be overwhelmed. You will be confused, right? A good inspiration to me for something like that are hyperscalers, like, let's say, AWS. You will see a lot of information when you create as EC2 instances, but you will not see all. You will not see what's happening behind the scenes in the hyperscaler and stuff like that. And then it comes the moment, you can do this, you can do that, and now you cannot do anything. Contact AWS. The whole data center is down. Now we are dropping below the layer of what you can do as a user, as a consumer of that something, right? So that level of filtering and choosing what you can do, not only what you can do in terms of I can create this or I can update that, but also what you can see is critical, right? And I see very often that people would, okay, I'm going to give developers all the logs and all the events and all the security issues and just go. And to me, that produces a completely negative, opposite effect from what we are often trying to do.
I think there was a confusion when we talked about being a self-sufficient engineer. It doesn't mean that you need to know everything. It's okay to put the contact me, right? And it's up to the platform engineer to be the product manager in a way, to really know their developers' expectation and capabilities, to know where to put the contact me or when to throw the error message to the developer and expect them to solve it on their own, because this is something within their domain and it's okay. And when developers get this contact me and error message, it creates the trust between the two parties, right? Because today, developers get, Victor, as you mentioned, the thread of logs, they see something red, and they just like, they raise their hand and they say, I can do it. Just like someone fix this failed build. I don't know how to take it from here. And it might be as simple as something that is syntax related in one of their parameters.
To me, that sounds like a portal is an actual living, breathing thing. Or it should be. Is that one of the places where companies go wrong when they're implementing a portal? Is they say, okay, day 0, we're going to get a portal. Day 1, we've got a portal. Day 2, same as day 1.
So a portal is a never-ending project because you always have more use cases and the business changes and technology changes, and therefore you need to adjust and you need to provide the right experiences and the right level of abstractions to your end users. I think where companies go wrong on this matter is managing portals like a waterfall project. They try to kind of like cover everything from day one. All the use cases, all the abstractions, all the dreams of the organization. But a portal is very much like a startup company. You create an MVP, you get some feedback from the field, you get some complaints, this is completely fine. You iterate, you gain trust with a limited set of test users, and then you expand it for more use cases as time goes by, just to create this level of trust within the organization. In day 0, we don't have a portal. In day 1, we have a portal with a very minimum set of capabilities. And day 2, we collect feedbacks. We don't continue and adding more things because this is the engineering thing to do. But we are dealing with people, not with the cluster. So we need to understand what they need and to be very mindful for their feedbacks.
Short while ago, I had a conversation with the person who wanted to have a chat, asking some questions. And the gist of it is, I'm a DevOps in my company. I was tasked to create a platform, right? Cool. My first question to that person was, who's the product manager of that platform?
What was the answer?
There is no product. What do you mean? I'm creating it. To me, that's the initial big mistake. Not treating it as a product with customers, right? You need to go and you're going to fail. Anybody, all of us here are involved in some capacity or another with startups, right? That's how it works. It's a startup. You have a product. Nobody wants it. And then you do a bit more. And then there are few people who want it. And then you learn from that. And then you expand and you expand and expand. And what companies do is what you mentioned, what I assume you mentioned when you mentioned waterfall, right? Oh, we have a project. Those are the requirements. This is the timeline. 3 years from now, we're going to have it. It's going to be finished, and everybody is going to live happily ever after. That's the silly. No customer-facing product ever worked like that successfully.
Exactly. And I think that this is the key to have this level of responsibility to pause for a second and not putting all the features of your dreams, because a portal, it's exciting. You want developers to enjoy their life. It's exciting. You have the dreams, right? I want them to be able to do all of these things. But often the reality is a little bit different, and therefore taking baby steps will be much, much better. And even if you went wrong, it's easy to fix. Same concepts of classic product management approach all over again, just for developers.
I think you just made probably that wasn't the intention, but a big mistake when you said you do everything of your dreams. It's not your dreams. It's their dreams. You need to figure out what their dreams are. It's not your dreams. Stop dreaming. That's one of the big things. It's not what you want them to do. Forget about what you want them to do. Try to figure out what they want to do.
Exactly. Yes. Sometimes I get it wrong as well, because sometimes you think you know what people need, and then you find out that sometimes they even don't know what they need, and then you need to talk together to understand together what we need, right? Absolutely, I agree with that. Another aspect is the fact that what will work for one company will not necessarily be the same for other companies, because they are very different, right? If we take two random companies like Netflix and Citibank, they will have different platforms inherently, right? Because they are very different from one another. So the experience that you will provide their end users will be different. Therefore, you need to build the portal according to the organizational DNA, right?
That's, I believe, where I see one huge division between solutions on the market right now. There is a group of solutions that go in the direction of, I know what they need, right? And I'm not talking about now the team that is creating a platform or a portal in a company, but I'm talking about vendor, right? Oh, this is the best way how you deploy applications to Kubernetes, right? And it's highly opinionated. You just install this thing, you click this button, and it works. And I always think that that's actually brilliant. That's great for small companies who are starting today, and they say, okay, so I can do it this way. Haven't done anything yet, right? This is a blank slate. I'm going to do it in this way. But then when we talk about bigger companies, there is no way that you can think of that works out of the box for more than one company. Simply because they have all history behind it. Oh, I use this service mesh and you use that service mesh and I don't use the service mesh. Go figure, right? So there needs to be some level of flexibility. And I like to distinguish those as portals designed for developers and portals designed for platform engineers who are going to create portals for developers.
Which one do you prefer?
Depends on the size, right? If I'm starting a company right now, I could say, you know what? I'm not even going to use any portal. I'm just going to go for Google Cloud Run. That works for me because I'm just going to, from day one, adapt to Google Cloud Run way of working, and I'm going to be a happy person, right? I mean, that's only one aspect of it, but ignore the rest for a second, right? But then, if I already have something, I need to have a mechanism to adapt whatever else I'm bringing into the system to that something. And I'm not even talking about portals right now or platforms, right? I'm talking about everything. Everything needs to somehow fit. It's a big machine, and you're bringing a screw to the machine, right? That screw needs to be of the size that fits into my machine, or it might need to come with additional tooling that will allow me to change the shape of that screw so that it fits. One of those two things, right?
Exactly. And I think also that even for big companies that, already have their, I would say, state, they also have the day two, right? Like they also have big changes, going towards multi-cloud. You also need to curate things according to the changes that you go as an enterprise, as a big company. And I think that for smaller companies, and when we started at Port, we also used the app runner, for example. It was, I think, the best decision that we could do, like just to abstract away as much as possible and go opinionated when we started. But as we started to get mature and to add more things and more requirements, this is where we started to need the level of flexibility from the platform point of view, and then to make sure that you try to provide a consistent experience to the developers while the platform is changing behind the scenes.
I think one thing Victor said earlier, he used the word best when referring to let's do it the best way. What was best today is not going to be or may not be the best tomorrow. And the chances of being best yesterday was probably not that great either. Are we just now at a point in time, dare I say the two letters AI? Are we now at a point in time in technology history to where if we're doing planning for longer than maybe 3 to 6 months, are we making projects too long?
I can answer that one right away. Yes. Huge yes. Think about it this way. What is the level of experience you can gain in 3 to 6 months versus planning in 3 to 6 months? In 6 months, I can get certain level, not very high, but I can get certain level of experience on Azure, on 2 major clouds versus planning. And now you plan for 6 months and let me actually do something for 6 months. And see who is going to have better conclusions at the end of that process. Even if I'm going to fail, right? I'm going to choose wrong way to do things in Azure, right? But I'm still going to have a better plan at the end than you, who is just planning.
Definitely, it's the planning too much, kind of like thinking about and imagining what you would like to create from an experience perspective is a problem, because you need to assume that you are wrong with what you are going to deliver your developers. And you just want to get the first feedback on the channel, or the first kind of like feedback session with the developers. And yeah, and you need to be a little bit obsessed with do continuous delivery for the platform that you maintain. For some reason, it's hard. It's hard as an engineer to not to include the things that you believe in that will work. It's interesting for me, Victor, like how do you think about essentially the portal, like that providing the experience for the end user holds the context of your SDLC in a way inside the software catalog. Like it sees the services and the deployments and the cloud resources and everything in between and environments. How do you see this single source of truth representation leveraged for the platform? Like not necessarily the developer's cognitive load, but the platform cognitive load to automate stuff and to use it as an API for context.
To answer that, I will go to the very beginning of our conversation. I think that you mentioned something along the direction of, okay, your platform is already what you have, and I agree with that. But for all this to work, right, we need a portal on top of it, definitely, no doubt. But we also need to rethink what is a service, what is below that portal, and what are the services that you're offering to somebody, right? If you just take a frontend and say, frontend is going to show me information from what is happening in the system, we get back to the same point where we were before the portal, right? Meaning that we have too big of a cognitive load on people. Because going back to our previous conversation, hey, you see logs that are irrelevant to you. You see metrics that are irrelevant to you. You're overwhelmed, and then you ignore even the things that matter to you. So I feel that, and I don't think that we are there as industry yet. But I think that whomever is creating those services, like, hey, this is how you deploy an application in Kubernetes, right? Before even visualizing it, we need to go a step further, right? It's not only about how you deploy an application to Kubernetes, and I'm using this only as an example, but I'm going to create a filter that will give you the events that matter to you. I'm going to create a filter that will focus only on the logs that matter to you, right? I'm going to treat it as a real service. And then from the portal perspective, right, we're going to load all that and present it to users. But we're not going to load all, right? Portal cannot do magic in a way, right? It cannot go and say, I'm going to automatically decide what developers should see, right? We need some kind of API that Portal can talk to and say, give me the logs that are relevant to developers. Give me the events that are relevant to developers. Give me the statuses that are relevant to developers, right? And then we aggregate all that and show it to people, right? Because the easiest part is the day one. How do I deploy application to Kubernetes? How do I create a database? That's the easy part. What happens later is, I feel, more challenging, right? How do we enable people to operate stuff? And the only way to operate stuff successfully is by showing you relevant information, because you cannot operate something blindly, and you become blind if you're overwhelmed. Darin is probably freaking out because I'm becoming philosophical now. I don't know whether this makes sense, but I hope it did.
I'm fine with you getting philosophical. And it doesn't matter if I follow it or not. It's just one of those things. I'm going to go back buried in that philosophy that you were just spitting out. I've already said it once. I'm going to say it again. Where is AI going to come into play? Like, I'm sitting here today. I'm logged into the portal as Darren. And somewhere along the line, or integrated in through Active Directory, my role that I follow and the applications that I'm associated with are all inside of Active Directory. or Okta or wherever. It doesn't matter. So now the portal, in theory, could get a handle to all that information. And as I move from team to team within the company, in theory, there shouldn't be anything magical that has to happen within the portal. I'm productizing things now. I'm solutioning. It's just like, oh, okay, I moved over to this team. So when I log into the portal the next day, guess what? All my old stuff is gone. Now I can still get to it because I could click through and find things, but my single pane of glass that welcomes me in the morning with my steaming hot cup of coffee, now it has all my new things. And it's not just, okay, I'm new to this, but maybe before I was a developer over on the other side of the house. I got a quote unquote promotion, you make the choice, to being a product owner on the other side of the house. So my dashboards completely change. Is that something that even makes sense for a portal? I mean, logically to me, it makes sense.
I think that thinking about AI and how it will affect the developer experience, I think that developers have all kind of needs, right? So they go into the portal to do all kind of stuff and to see a certain level of visualization for something around the SDLC or doing an action against Kubernetes. I think that AI will create less UI components into the portal itself and gives developer like a companion that they can use to interact with the platform itself behind the scenes, right? So I think that developers will need to see even less things inside, and they can simply ask questions or do tasks directly from the portal itself that will be able to find the right level of visualization that is needed for the specific task. If I remediate an issue, or if I need to do some kind of an action, it will give me just the right form that I need to fill out according to my request and the urgency of the request. So we are going to see a little bit more, I would say, a more dynamic view according to the use case that I need as a developer.
The way I see AI right now is that AIs are becoming extremely good at digesting significant amount of information and spitting it back to us in a summarized form, right? I can go right now to ChatGPT. ChatGPT has almost whole internet as its knowledge base, ask a question and I get the answer, right? And I think that we can use that to solve one of the problems that we were discussing before, right? So let's say use case scenario would be this. I want to enable developers not only to deploy application, but to choose when to scale that application. Let's say that there is no auto-scaling, right? I want to enable developers to say I want more replicas, right? Now, for me to do that, I need to provide visibility to developers, right? I will need to give them relevant information so they can make that decision. It's easy for me to do something that will click a button and scale, right? But how do I give them information that will enable them to make that decision? Now, I can spend 7 years creating filters. I can say, hey, whenever I see this in logs, this word and this and that, and I will never manage because systems are huge. Amount of information is massive. Now, I feel that we can use AIs for that. I could theoretically create a mechanism and say, you know what? Whichever information in the system is somehow related to this application, is related to scaling, spit it out. Filter it for me, right? That's a hard thing because I honestly wouldn't know if you would give me a task right now. Here are the zillions of lines of logs. Create a filter that will be focused only on that application and only on the parts of that application that are related to scaling. I would not know how to do that. But AIs might, right? They're very good at digesting information.
It's true. And I think that also, not necessarily from let's say the developer perspective, right? Like providing them with a way to connect to what you said, Victor. I think that because when you create the experience inside the portal, intuitively you will need to connect with all the different pieces of the platform. And then you have a lot of raw information. Now it's time to create context, a glue between all these little pieces of information from your Kubernetes, your cloud, your deployments, your environments, your services, they all connect logically together. So you have like the tags and you have those, labels, and you have syntax that you try to maintain, but someone will destroy it by mistake and then you can't find anything. But you try to stitch everything together, and then AI can really help on first identify those inconsistencies of the connections that you try to remain between the different elements of your platform, if it's a cloud resource, a deployment, and a service in one visualization. So it can really help in organizing the data in context to your SDLC. And this data does not exist in anywhere in the world in one place, because it's really, really hard to do that. And I think that this is also where developer portals will go, by helping you create this one visualization of SDLC that takes all this siloed data from all the places, and AI will put it in context.
So we go from raw information to context. But how can we move from context to solution? Like, it's great that I've got context, but that's one less thing that I want to do. It's like, just tell me the solution.
I feel that solutions are easier. It's easier for me to create a field in a UI where you specify the number of replicas than to provide information that will enable people to make a decision when to scale that application. That's my feeling, right? I feel that solution is easier than making a decision when to apply a solution.
And I will definitely recommend to put some human in the loop in day one before we scale.
So port can be found at getport.io. And again, where he said the H1 is an open internal developer portal. If I wanted to try it out, what does trying it out mean in a port context?
Yeah, so port is called an open internal developer portal, not because it's open source, because it's not. Part of it are open source, but it's not open source. It's open from the perspective that your organization has the needs and the requirements and the DNA, and portals should comply with your way of work and your developers' needs. So it's open in a way that it adjusts itself to the way that you work to create a very compelling experience according to your developers' needs. So to get started with port, you will get a template that you can get started with the best practice that we provide, that includes services and builds and a few actions for deployment and scaffolding services and so on. But from there, you can extend it, and therefore the openness, to the different use cases after you release the MVP to your end users, as mentioned for the best practice. So you can create the world your developers would expect and need to be self-sufficient, and port giving you those building blocks. Think of it as Lego parts that you can use to create the castle that your organization needs. So we provide you the building blocks. When I say you, I mean the platform engineer, to build what is right for their end users. Making port, taking a portal-less product approach. You are the product manager. We give you best practices. But we do not assume that we know your end users better than you are. And we encourage you to do that. We encourage you to learn and talk to your end users to build the right level of abstraction.
So am I correct in stating that port, in that case, if you remember the two categories I was talking about before, it's not a portal for the developers. It's more like a tool that enables companies to create portal for their developers, right?
I think, yes, it's both. I think that if you want to get started and to take a more opinionated approach from day one, because you're a small company and you want us to give you the do's and don'ts, you can definitely get started with a template and stick to it. But what happens to larger companies? They say, "Oh, this is great for me, it's a little bit different in those use cases, and I need also this use case to be added on top. So to the question, Port is a solution to allow you to build a portal.
So again, Port can be found at getport.io, and all of Zohar's contact information will be down in the episode description. Zohar, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was amazing to talk today.
We hope this episode was helpful to you. If you want to discuss it or ask a question, please reach out to us. Our contact information and a link to the Slack workspace are at devopsparadox.com/contact. If you subscribe through Apple Podcast, be sure to leave us a review there. That helps other people discover this podcast. Go sign up right now at devopsparadox.com to receive an email whenever we drop the latest episode. Thank you for listening to DevOps Paradox.